gluten-free eclairs. So why may you want to learn how to make gluten-free eclairs? Well, these days there's lots of different people who have allergies or intolerances to wheat, whether they are gluten sensitive, wheat intolerant, or celiac. Now, learning how to make gluten-free eclairs not only allows us to cater to these allergies, but also people who are abstaining from eggs, who are vegan, so we can make a lot of our customers happy. So choux pastry is the very unique pastry used to make some of the most famous French pastries like eclairs, choux buns, and profiteroles. Now through this training video, we're going to go through step by step the methods and techniques involved to master your choux pastry for your eclairs and choux buns, and really talk about how we incorporate our ingredients, the special look that we need, how to pipe, and also how to bake to create that perfect texture and finish to our choux buns. The name choux in French translates to cabbage, and this is because when the choux buns are piped and baked, they resemble little cabbages. So making eclairs with choux pastry has got the reputation of being one of the most difficult pastries to master in the traditional world, but vegan, now that's another challenge that we face because choux pastry relies so heavily on eggs to give it its signature hollow center. The main leavening agent in this unique dough is of course steam. It is steam powered, and also the egg or our special egg replacement in this recipe. Now, as our choux pastry or eclairs are baking in the oven, we create steam in the center, and as the steam builds up, it creates that signature hollow center that we're looking for. So there's a lot of science behind it to have success with this style of dough. We create what is known as a panade. So we take our flour, water, and fat and cook these two together. Now the reason that we do this is because this dough relies so heavily on steam to create its hollow center. We want to incorporate as much moisture as possible into the dough, and we do this by cooking it, allowing those starches to completely hydrate as much moisture as possible. So we bake this pastry, we're going to have more success of pushing that steam and creating that beautiful signature hollow center. Gluten is not imperative or the sole or most important source of creating structure in this traditional pastry. Now, what we are usually using to create structure or holding our choux, cabbage, or our eclair bun together is the eggs, and also relying heavily on the steam and starches. So because we are not using gluten as the primary structure component, using eggs, or in our case, our panis egg, our vegan egg replacer, it is important that it has all those special functions that eggs have to create the signature look, professional finish, and classic style to this unique pastry. Now, before we get into making our choux pastry, I wanted to give an important shout out to Yves Scherer. Now, he has been my teacher and mentor, and I've teamed up with him to perfect this recipe of choux pastry, completely plant-based. And I met him many years ago at Cordon Bleu, and at the time it was also the Australian Patisserie Academy, and I have done training with him there. He has worked in the pastry industry for over 20 years now and coached the Team Australia for the World Pastry Championships. Now that is also known as the Coupe du Monde in France. Yves' specialty is choux pastry, and when I knew that I was going to come back and share with you folks how to make professional vegan eclairs, I knew he was the perfect person to contact. So thank you so much, Yves, and now I want everyone to go check out his Instagram for Madame and Yves, and you can see all the beautiful traditional French pastries that he is creating, and he does have a couple of vegan offerings as well. Now, when working with gluten-free baking, it's very important that all of your equipment utensils, and anything that you're using to create your allergy-free product is sanitized and cleaned very well. We don't want any cross-contamination, so we can ensure that there is no gluten anywhere and we're not going to have any upset tummies or upset our customers. Now, when making vegan choux pastry, it is very important that we use the correct vegan egg replacer. And today we are using Pate egg, which replaces all the 8 major functions of eggs. And it's very important in this recipe because we are replacing so many of those functions that eggs do to make this recipe achievable with that beautiful hollow center. So I've gone ahead and measured out my water measurement A, and my Pate egg powder, and we're just going to combine that together. I also like to add a little bit of turmeric. Now this is going to add that egg yellow color to our vegan egg, so we can just make it look more authentic. Now, using your immersion blender, you're just going to blend everything together until it's nice and smooth. Now you'll notice that our Pate egg solution is going to be a lot thicker or viscous than traditional eggs. Now that's completely normal. Don't be tempted to add any more water to this mixture. So instead of wheat flour in this recipe, we're going to be using rice flour. Now, not to be confused with rice starch, this is the whole rice that's being ground into a fine flour or milled into a fine flour. So this is what I'm using today. I find that this flour gives the best texture to our vegan eclairs and the best solution for this recipe. So I like to sift it just to ensure that there's no lumps, and I'm just going to sift that into my bowl here. And I do advise, if you can get the finer grain or the finer milled rice flour, that's the one to get. Now that we have our rice sifted and ready to go, we can start creating our panade, which is our cooked dough for our choux pastry. So you want to go ahead and grab yourself a saucepan, and to that we're going to be adding our water measurement B, along with a neutral oil. So today I'm just using some sunflower oil, but you could also use grapeseed oil or canola oil. And I know that a lot of choux pastry recipes traditionally would use butter. However, because we are making a plant-based version today, I find using oil is a much better solution because we can consistently get the same results. Sometimes vegan margarines vary in terms of their fat content and ingredients, so oil is the way to go. Along to that, we're adding some sea salt and a small amount of sugar. And our last ingredient is our invert syrup. Now, this invert syrup I made myself, and I have linked the recipe in your course dashboard of how to make your own invert syrup. You can purchase this as a commercial product, and it's an important ingredient to use in this recipe because it's going to keep our choux pastry nice and soft, and also allow us to freeze and thaw our pastry without it compromising on the texture of the finished product. So just add that to your water. Now we're going to put this over a low to medium heat and slowly bring it to a boil. I like to stir continuously just to ensure that that heat is evenly transferred through our liquid. Once you start to see some small bubbles starting to appear at the base of the pan, we can increase our heat to high while stirring, and we want to bring this to a nice rapid boil. As soon as it's rapidly boiling, we want to take that off the heat and put it all into our rice flour. And we want to mix this very well. And this is going to start gelatinizing the starches in our rice flour. Now, when you're working with gluten-free flours, I do find with working with this rice flour that some of that oil is going to separate from the flour. Now, don't be alarmed by that. That's going to be completely normal and everything's going to come back together later on. So once that's started to hydrate through our rice flour, we're going to put this back into our saucepan. Just make sure you get all of it in there. Now I'm going to put this over a low heat. And set my timer for 3 minutes. Now, because some of that oil has separated, you just want to be very careful. We don't want too much heat. And be careful as you stir your dough. We don't want it to stick to the bottom. If it starts sticking to the bottom, just turn down that temperature. So we want to make sure that we get even heat throughout our rice flour, throughout our panade. And what that's going to do is give strength to our gluten-free eclairs. So when the steam is doing its job and puffing out that hollow center, it's going to be able to hold onto it. You'll start to see the texture changing. It'll start getting a lot thicker. All right, so my timer's just gone off. I'm going to turn that heat off. And we're going to check the temperature of our panade. So I like to use one of these probe thermometers and just pop that inside our dough. And we want to bring this dough up to around 80 to 83 degrees Celsius. Yep, so it's come up to my temperature, so that's great. Now we're going to transfer this into our stand mixer bowl and we want to start cooling down our dough. Now, of course, you can do all of this by hand, so if you don't have a stand mixer bowl, you can just pop this into a bowl, cover it with some cling wrap and just allow it to cool down. And just make sure you get all of that oil in as well. I know some of it probably would have separated with this gluten-free flour. Now we have our panade in our bowl. I'm going to add the paddle attachment. And we're going to start mixing this on the lowest speed for about 2 minutes, and then we're going to check the temperature. We want this to cool down between 40 and 50 degrees Celsius to ensure when we add our vegan egg that it's not going to cook or start setting and create a strange texture. So just on the first speed, I'm going to start slowly mixing that. And again, don't worry if there's a little bit of that separation with a bit of the oil that's come out of the dough. That's all going to come back together when we add our vegan egg. Now that's been a couple of minutes, we're going to check our temperature on our panade. So remember, we want to make sure that we have cooled it down between 40 and 50 degrees Celsius. We just don't want it to cook our vegan egg. Okay, I'm getting a reading of 36 degrees. It's very cold in my room, so it has cooled down quickly. Now we have our vegan egg here. I always like to re-blend it just before I start adding it. So I'm just going to blend it again, and you'll see that the color would have changed from the turmeric. It's had a bit of time to hydrate. Try and get as much of the vegan egg off your blender as well. So we're going to start adding our vegan egg a little bit at a time. We want to create an emulsion. Now with working with the gluten-free dough, it's very important that we're constantly checking it and making sure that we're scraping down the bowl and the paddle to make sure we're not getting any lumps. So I'm going to start off with about 1 to 2 tablespoons of our vegan egg, and on a low speed, start mixing everything together. You want to add the egg slowly, allow about 30 seconds in between each addition. In the beginning stages, you'll notice the texture. It will look a little bit funny. It might even look a little bit like scrambled eggs, but don't be alarmed. As we slowly add our vegan egg, it's all going to come together. After you've done about 2 additions of your vegan egg, I'd recommend to just take your bowl off and scrape down on your paddle. You'll notice that there'll probably be a lot of that panade that has stuck. We want to make sure that it gets all incorporated before we add more of our vegan egg. And scrape down the sides and underneath your bowl. I can see that my dough is just starting to come together. It's looking very stiff at the moment, that's fine. We're just going to continually slowly adding our vegan egg. You really want to take your time. The gluten-free flour, this rice flour, is going to hydrate a lot more slowly than a traditional wheat flour would. Okay, we're going to add a little more. And because we're working with such a small quantity today, you want to make sure that you get all of that vegan egg in there. Really scrape your jug. Now once all your vegan egg replacer has been added, we're going to continue mixing this on the lowest speed for 10 full minutes. As mentioned before, the rice flour takes a little bit more time to hydrate all of that moisture, which is very important for this type of pastry. So we're going to really allow that to happen by mixing it for 10 minutes. So I'm going to pop this on. Okay, so it's been 10 minutes and our dough has been mixing. We've got some good hydration. And you will notice that this dough, our gluten-free dough, is a lot thicker than our vegan Eclair dough or our traditional dough. But we can still get our signature V. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So you want to gather a decent amount of the dough on the paddle. And you'll see how it's hanging off the paddle. And we have some good elasticity. It's just a little bit stiffer than the wheat-based one. So if you can see that. Okay. So something a little bit different that we're going to do now for our gluten-free dough. I do notice that our gluten-free dough, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to get it completely smooth because in the beginning stages it's very, very sticky and stiff. So we're going to put this through a food processor. And you might be asking, Jess, why didn't you do this from the beginning? Why didn't you mix everything just in a food processor? That's a good question. So the reason that we don't do the entire process in a food processor is it's going to create too much heat, which is going to change the texture of our dough. So I like to use it just at the end, just as a fail-safe to make sure that our dough is very nice and smooth. So I'm going to blend this on a high speed for about 30 seconds and then we're going to scrape everything down. And again, we're going to blend on high speed again for about 30 to 45 seconds. Now, if your dough is lumpy or you miss some of those lumps, you can blend it, but I would advise just to give your dough a break. We don't want it to get too hot. So just make sure that if you do need to blend it again, I'd recommend just leave it for about 5-10 minutes to cool down and then reblend. So we're going to get this into a piping bag. Now we're making classic eclairs today, so I'm using a size 18 French fluted tip nozzle, and that's a nozzle that has lots of little teeth all around it. I find that this is the best style piping tip nozzle, and the reason that we use a nozzle tip like this is having all those little grooves is going to create more surface area on our eclair, meaning it's going to be less likely to create cracks, and it's also going to help in the process of the steam creating the hollow center. And when we put our dough in our piping bag, we just want to make sure that we're not adding too much air. So make sure that we don't put any air pockets in there. Now we can start piping our eclairs. Now I've got ahead and grab myself a large tray here. And we're just going to pop down some baking paper. Now it's a good idea just to clip your paper down, just to ensure, especially if you have a fan in your oven, that it's not going to fly around. Make sure that's nice and flat, and then we're going to go in with our air mat. Now these air mats, it's essentially a silicone mat that's got lots of little holes. And what this is going to do is create even airflow and also help with the leavening or the puff of our choux pastry. Now this one I got from Silicomart, and they do these ones which are especially for eclairs, which are fantastic because it already has the markings of where to pipe your eclairs. Now I do find sometimes that they're a little bit too wide for the tray, so you can just go ahead and trim that with a pair of scissors. Now we're going to go in with some grease spray, so any type of vegetable oil spray is fine. And we just want to make sure that our eclairs are not going to stick at all. So now we're going to start piping our eclairs. Now we're going to pipe at a 45-degree angle, and this is very important for the rise of our eclairs as well, like creating consistency in our piping. So piping is very much a technique when it comes to creating vegan choux pastries like eclairs. We want to ensure that they're all consistent, the same size, the same width and height. So take your time with this, pipe slowly, make sure that you have good grip and pressure. I like to use my right hand or my dominant hand to keep the pressure, and then my left hand to help guide me pipe. So just take your time. So if you pipe an eclair that you're not quite happy with, you can just scrape it up with an offset spatula and pop the dough back into your bag and repipe it. So I wasn't very happy with this eclair, so we're going to repipe it, and we just want to carefully pick it back up off our tray. Put it in our piping bag. And we just want to make sure that there's no air bubbles. So I'm just kind of giving a little bit of a massage, scraping it down. And I'm going to pipe this one again. So you should get about 12 gluten-free eclairs from this dough recipe. We want to tap underneath our tray just to bring any air bubbles to the surface that may have formed inside. And this is a very similar technique as when we are making our macarons. So just give it a good tap underneath. Just make sure you turn that tray around everywhere it gets a good tap. Bowl here with some water. I'm just going to dip my fingertip in there and see these little tails or the little bits of dough that's sticking up. We're just going to press those down, or anything that's a little uneven. Now we're going lightly with a fork. We're going to recreate those indentations that were there before. So now that is done, I'm going to go and spray these with some oil. Now this is going to help to prevent cracking. So give them a good spray all over. And now we're going to dust them lightly with some confectioner's sugar. This is going to give them a nice golden color, some nice browning, and also again help prevent cracks. Now our eclairs are ready to bake. Now our oven is preheated to 135 degrees Celsius. We're going to start our first stage of baking. Now in this baking stage, we're just looking to get the maximum puff from our eclairs. We're not really going to color them too much. We're going to pop these in now and then check in about 10 minutes time. So I've just set my oven to 40 minutes. We are on the baking stage 1, or our first baking stage. We're essentially just looking to get the maximum puff from our eclairs and bake them, not really adding too much color. So within the first 10 minutes, we want to just make sure that we are not getting any colorization on our eclairs and that we can see that they're puffing. Now during this first stage of baking, it's extremely important that we do not open our oven door. If we open the oven door too early, then we run the risk of our eclairs collapsing. So just keep an eye from outside. We are going to check back in at 10 minutes and see where we are. So we're about at the 10-minute mark, and I can see that my eclairs have already started to puff. So that's looking good. Our temperature is correct. We're not getting any colorization as yet, so that's perfect. Now, you may be wondering why we are cooking these at quite a low temperature. So the reason being, because these are plant-based eclairs, we are not using eggs. Our vegan egg replacer will coagulate at a lower temperature than traditional eggs. So we are cooking these a little bit lower than a traditional eclair or choux pastry, lower and slower. So have to be a little bit more patient with our vegan style eclairs and choux pastries. I'm going to continue baking these for another 10 minutes and then check in and see how we're going. If you're noticing that your eclairs are starting to color at about the 15-minute mark, you may want to turn your temperature down 5 degrees. So when using your oven, things may need to change slightly, whether you put it up or down slightly. But I'm happy where we're at now, so we're going to continue for another 10 minutes. So it's been about another 10 minutes, and I can see that my eclairs have puffed up nicely. I'm very happy with them. And there's no colorization on them at all. Maybe just a very, very tiny bit. I can see just these front ones, which is fine. So I know that my oven temperature is correct. We are going to continue baking these at the same temperature for our remaining 18 minutes and then check them before we release the steam. Okay, let's keep baking. So our 40 minutes is up. I can see some good colorization on our eclairs. So it's just starting to color. You can see it's sort of like a honey color at this stage at the end of the 40 minutes. So now what we're going to do is release our steam. So it is very important that we get to this stage before we release the steam. Otherwise, we do run the risk of our eclairs collapsing. Now, if your eclairs look a little bit pale, you can add another 5 minutes. I'm happy with these. So if you have the option on your oven, you can open the vent or you can just open the door. So I'm just going to open my door, let that steam out for about 5-10 seconds. I'm going to close the door. And we're going to add some more time. So we're going to add 40 minutes. And increase our temperature to 145 degrees Celsius. Now, if you do have a vent in your oven, you can open that. And we are going to cook on our stage 2 baking for 40 minutes. And at this stage, we are essentially drying out our eclairs and also creating a nice golden color. I'm going to check these in about 15 minutes and rotate the tray just so we get nice even color throughout. So yeah, let's continue our baking. So our stage 2 baking. So it's been about 15 minutes. I'm just going to rotate my tray just so we get some good even coloring on our eclairs. But they're already looking fantastic. Still a bit pale, so we're going to continue baking them a bit. Okay, so our eclairs are ready. They're a beautiful golden color. They've had plenty of time to dry out in the oven. Take a look there at our hard work. We've got some good puffs, some good rise. Now I'm going to set those aside to cool down completely before we fill them with our cream. Now I've had my gluten-free eclairs cooling, so they've completely cooled down now. So you can go ahead and put your fillings in and glazes. However, if you want to prepare these ahead of time, especially if you are working in food service or you have your own business or catering, you can prepare these ahead of time. Go ahead, bake them, allow them to cool, and then just transfer them into a container. And these can go into the freezer for at least a couple of weeks. And when you're ready to use them, so on the day that you're preparing your eclairs, just take them out of the freezer and refresh them in an oven set to 150 degrees Celsius for about 7 minutes.